The warning lights flickered across the monitoring station like angry red stars. Commander Lynara's webbed fingers moved quickly over the control panel, her large eyes widening with each new piece of data that appeared on her screen. Something was very wrong in the Velara system. She had been working the night shift at the Galactic Union monitoring station for 3 cycles now. Usually her job was boring. She watched empty space, recorded cosmic radiation levels, and filed reports that nobody read. Tonight was different. Tonight, 15 unknown ships had just entered her home system, and they were not responding to any communication attempts. Lynara pulled up the scan results and felt her breathing tubes constrict with fear. The ships were massive, heavily armed, and moving in a formation that could only mean one thing. This was a military fleet, and they were heading straight for Velara Prime. Her homeworld was peaceful. The Velarans had never known war. They lived on a gentle planet with low gravity and warm oceans. Their people were scientists, artists, and healers. They had no weapons, no soldiers, no way to defend themselves against an attack like this. The communication system suddenly crackled to life. A harsh voice filled the station, speaking in the common galactic language. The voice belonged to someone who called himself War Master Krex of the Krell Dominion. His message was simple and terrible. Velara Prime had 3 planetary cycles to surrender completely. If they refused, the Krell would destroy their cities from orbit and take whatever survivors they wanted as slaves. Lynara's hand shook as she immediately sent an emergency message to the Velaran Council on the planet below. Then she began broadcasting a distress signal to every Galactic Union member world she could reach. Her message was desperate and honest. Velara Prime needed help. They needed military ships, weapons, soldiers, anything that could stop the Krell fleet from destroying everything she loved. The responses came back slowly, and each one made Lynara's heart sink lower. The Tarkans were too far away to help in time. The Zenthians had no military fleet to send. The Korath Empire was already fighting the Krell on another front and could spare no ships. One by one, every species in the Galactic Union gave her the same answer. They were sorry, but Velara Prime was on its own. Lynara stared at her screens, watching the Krell fleet move closer to her homeworld. She thought about her family down on the surface, her twin sons who were studying medicine at the university, her partner who taught young Velarans about the beauty of the ocean depths. They would all die in 3 cycles unless someone helped them. She made a decision that broke every protocol she had been taught. If the Galactic Union would not help, then she would call for help beyond Union space. She modified her distress signal to broadcast on every frequency she could access, sending it out into the dark regions of space where unknown species lived. It was dangerous and probably useless, but she had to try. The signal traveled through space at faster than light speeds, bouncing off relay stations and emergency beacons. It crossed into regions that Galactic Union ships rarely visited. It traveled for hours until finally, it reached a small blue planet on the edge of explored space. A planet that was marked in very old galactic databases with a warning label. Class 12 Deathworld. Avoid contact. The planet was called Earth. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was finishing his 3rd cup of coffee when the distress signal came through. He was working the monitoring station at Earth's deep space relay, a job that was usually so quiet he spent most of his time reading or watching old movies. The sudden alarm made him spill hot coffee all over his uniform. He swore quietly and pulled up the incoming message on his screen. It was in a language that Earth's computers could translate, but just barely. The message was from something called the Galactic Union, from a species called Velarans, and they were begging for help. Jake read through the message twice to make sure he understood it correctly. An alien world was about to be attacked by another alien fleet. They had asked everyone they knew for help and nobody was coming. Jake immediately forwarded the message to his commanding officer, then to Earth Defense Command headquarters. He knew this would go straight to the top. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 20 years, and they were always looking for ways to prove themselves as good neighbors. Within an hour, the message reached Admiral Patricia Hayes at Earth Defense Command. She sat in her office reading the distress signal and studying the data about the Krell fleet. She had her staff pull up everything they had on file about the Krell Dominion and the Velarans. What she learned made her angry. The Krell were bullies who attacked peaceful worlds and took what they wanted. The Velarans were exactly the kind of people who needed protection. They had done nothing wrong except exist on a planet that the Krell wanted. Admiral Hayes called an emergency meeting with her senior staff. They discussed the situation for 2 hours. Some officers argued that this was not Earth's problem. Humanity was still new to galactic politics, and getting involved in someone else's war could make powerful enemies. Other officers argued that this was exactly why Earth needed to help. If humanity wanted to be respected in the galaxy, they needed to show that they stood up for what was right. Admiral Hayes listened to all the arguments, then made her decision. Earth would respond to the distress call. The UNS Defiance, humanity's newest and most powerful carrier ship, would lead a small fleet to Valara Prime. They would arrive before the Krell deadline and offer military assistance to the Valaran people. She knew this decision might start a war. She knew human lives would be at risk, but she also knew that humanity had learned hard lessons about what happened when good people did nothing in the face of evil. Earth had made mistakes in its past, terrible mistakes that had cost millions of lives, but they had also learned to be better, to stand up for those who could not defend themselves. Captain Brandon Cole received his orders while having dinner with his family. He kissed his wife and 2 daughters goodbye, knowing he might not see them again. Then he returned to the UNS Defiance and called his senior officers together for a briefing. The meeting was short and direct. They were going to an unknown system to fight an unknown enemy to save people they had never met. The crew had 20 hours to prepare. They would be jumping into hyperspace and traveling for 2 planetary cycles. When they arrived at Valara Prime, they would have 1 cycle to prepare before the Krell attacked. Captain Cole looked at his officers and saw no hesitation in their eyes. These men and women had volunteered for Earth's military, knowing that their job was to protect others. It did not matter if those others were human or alien. Someone had called for help and humans were going to answer. The UNS Defiance and 5 support ships left Earth orbit 12 hours later. On board were 800 human crew members, 200 Marines, 60 fighter pilots, and enough weapons to fight a small war. They jumped into hyperspace and disappeared, traveling toward a distant star system where frightened aliens waited for help that might never come. But help was coming. The Deathworlders had heard the call. Commander Lenara had not slept in 2 cycles. She sat at her station, watching the edge of the Valara system, hoping against hope that someone would come. The Krell fleet had moved into orbit around Valara Prime, and War Master Krek sent threatening messages every few hours. Her people were terrified. Cities were being evacuated. Families were saying goodbye to each other, preparing for the worst. Then her sensors detected something. Ships were coming out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, 6 vessels smaller than the Krell warships but moving with purpose. Lenara's breathing tubes fluttered with sudden hope. Someone had answered her distress call. She opened a communication channel to the approaching ships. The lead vessel identified itself as the UNS Defiance from Earth. Lenara quickly searched her computer database for information about Earth. What she found made her hope turn to confusion, and Fear.Earth was listed as a Class 12 death world. The database had very little information, but what was there was frightening. Extreme gravity, violent weather patterns, thousands of predator species. The planet was covered in warnings. Advanced species avoided death worlds because nothing good came from such horrible places. The communication channel opened, and Lenara saw her first human. Captain Brandon Cole appeared on her screen, and she had to stop herself from backing away in fear. He was tall and stood straight despite what her sensor said was crushing gravity on his ship. His eyes were positioned on the front of his face, the clear mark of a predator species. His body looked dense and powerful, built for strength rather than grace. Captain Cole spoke in a calm, friendly voice. He said that Earth had received Valara Prime's distress signal and come to help. He asked for all information about the Krell fleet and details about Valara Prime's defenses. He spoke like this was a normal thing to do, traveling across space to fight someone else's battles. Lenara transmitted all the data she had. Then she asked the question that was making her hearts pound with fear. What did Earth want in return for their help? In galactic politics, nothing was free. Military assistance always came with a price. What would these Deathworlders demand for saving Valara Prime? Captain Cole looked surprised by the question. He said they wanted nothing. Someone needed help, and humans came when people called for help. It was that simple. Lenara did not know if she should feel relieved or more frightened. She thanked the captain and closed the communication channel. Then she began researching everything she could find about Earth and humans. What she learned over the next several hours made her question if they had made a terrible mistake by asking for help. Humans were pursuit predators. They evolved by chasing prey animals until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. Humans could run for days without stopping. They could survive injuries that would kill most species. They healed remarkably fast. Their planet had tried to kill them in every possible way, and they had survived by becoming more dangerous than anything else on their world. But what really frightened Lenara was human history. She read about their wars. Humans had fought each other for thousands of years. They had built weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. They had killed millions of their own kind in conflicts over resources, religion, and political ideas. They had nearly destroyed their own planet several times. These were the beings coming to save Valara Prime. These were the creatures her people had asked to bring weapons and violence to their peaceful system. Linara sent all of this information to the Valaran Council on the planet below. The council held an emergency meeting that lasted for hours. They faced an impossible choice: accept help from creatures that might be as dangerous as the Krell, or face certain destruction when the Krell attacked. In the end, survival won. The council gave permission for the human fleet to enter orbit around Valara Prime. Captain Cole requested a meeting with the Valaran leadership. The meeting was held through holographic projection because Valarans could not survive in the high-gravity environment that humans preferred. Cole brought 2 of his officers. Lieutenant Commander Amy Fletcher was his tactical officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a quick mind. Major Kyle Bennett was his Marine commander, a large man who looked like he was built for combat. The meeting did not go well at first. Captain Cole presented a defense plan that made every Velaran in the room uncomfortable. He talked about aggressive fleet maneuvers, surprise attacks, and something called boarding actions, where Marines would actually enter Krell ships and fight hand to hand. He discussed acceptable casualty rates and strategic targets. The Valarans had no military tradition. They did not understand tactics or strategy. The idea of deliberately attacking someone else, even in self-defense, went against everything their culture believed. They were scientists and healers, not warriors. Captain Cole seemed to understand their discomfort. He simplified his explanation. The human fleet would handle all combat operations. All the Velarans needed to do was evacuate civilians from cities that might be targeted by Krell weapons. The humans would do the fighting. The humans would take the risks. The humans would face the Krell fleet. One of the Valaran counselors, an old female named Elder Seema, asked why. Why would humans risk their lives for people they had never met? What did they gain from this? There had to be a reason. Captain Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said that humans came from a world that tried to kill them every day. They learned early that survival meant protecting each other. They learned that the strong had a responsibility to defend the weak. Yes, humans had fought terrible wars. Yes, they had made horrible mistakes. But they had also learned that the only thing necessary for evil to win was for good people to do nothing. Someone had to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. Humans had decided a long time ago that they would be those people. It was not about profit or power. It was about doing what was right. A young Valaran scientist named Kima spoke up from the back of the council chamber. She asked if humans were afraid. Did they not fear death? How could they volunteer to fight knowing they might die? Major Bennett answered this question. He said that of course they were afraid. Fear was natural and healthy, but courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was doing what needed to be done despite being afraid. Every human on those 6 ships knew the risks. They came anyway because someone needed help. The meeting ended with the Velaran Council formally accepting Earth's military assistance. Captain Cole and his officers returned to the Defiance to prepare for the coming battle. The Krell deadline was approaching, and everyone knew that War Master Krex would not accept any answer except complete surrender. Commander Lenara visited the UNS Defiance in person before the battle. She took a small shuttle up from Valara Prime, and when she boarded the human carrier, she was shocked by what she experienced. The gravity was crushing, almost twice what she was used to. She could barely stand upright. The temperature was cold by Velaran standards. The air was thick with oxygen. But the humans moved through this hostile environment like it was nothing. They walked, ran, worked, and talked as if this crushing pressure was perfectly normal. Lenara realized that these beings lived every day in conditions that she found barely survivable. No wonder they were so dangerous. Their own world had made them into weapons. Captain Cole met her in a room with reduced gravity so she could breathe more easily. He showed her the memorial wall where humans honored their dead. Names were carved into metal, thousands of names from centuries of human conflicts. He explained that humans never forgot the cost of violence. Every name represented someone who had died fighting, and humans made sure to remember each one. He also showed her something else. Messages from human families back on Earth. Letters and video recordings sent to the crew of the Defiance. Parents telling their children they were proud. Partners saying they loved them. Children asking their mothers and fathers to come home safe. These dangerous predators from a nightmare world were also people with families and feelings and hearts that could break. Lenara returned to Valara Prime with a different understanding of humans. Yes, they were dangerous. Yes, they came from a death world that had shaped them into efficient killers. But they were also capable of great compassion. They chose to use their strength to protect rather than dominate. They knew the cost of violence and chose to pay it so others would not have to. The Krell deadline was hours away. War Master Krex sent one final message demanding surrender. The human fleet moved into position, hiding behind Valara Prime's gas giant moon. Their stealth systems were active, making them invisible to Krell sensors. On the bridge of the UNS Defiance, Captain Cole sat in his command chair and watched the countdown. His crew was ready. His Marines were armed and waiting. His fighter pilots were in their cockpits. In a few hours, humans would show the galaxy what Deathworlders could do when they decided to fight. Commander Lenara watched from her station. She prayed to the old Valaran gods that she had made the right choice. The Deathworlders were here. Soon everyone would learn if they were saviors or simply a different kind of threat. The Krell fleet hung in space like a pack of predators surrounding wounded prey. 15 massive warships, each one bristling with weapons and covered in thick armor plating. The largest vessel was the Bloodfang, a dreadnought-class ship that served as War Master Krex's flagship. From its bridge, Krex looked down at Valara Prime and felt satisfied. This would be an easy conquest. Krex was a veteran of dozens of campaigns. He had crushed resistance from stronger species than these weak Valarans. His reputation was built on overwhelming force and brutal efficiency. Species that surrendered quickly were allowed to live as slaves. Species that resisted were wiped out completely. It was a simple system that had worked for years. He broadcast his final message to Valara Prime. His voice was harsh and filled with contempt. The Valarans had one rotation left to accept his terms. Surrender completely, give up all weapons and ships, and prepare to serve the Krell Dominion. Refuse, and their cities would burn from orbit. Their oceans would boil. Their civilization would end. What Krex did not know was that 6 human vessels were hiding in the shadow of Valara Prime's largest moon. Their stealth systems made them nearly invisible to Krell sensors. Captain Cole and his crew had been waiting in complete silence for hours, watching the Krell fleet and planning their attack. Lieutenant Commander Amy Fletcher studied the Krell formation on her tactical display. She was Earth's best tactical officer, someone who could see patterns and weaknesses that others missed. What she saw now made her smile. The Krell were overconfident. Their ships were spread too far apart to support each other. They were not expecting any real resistance. She turned to Captain Cole and said the Krell had made a mistake. They were treating this like another easy conquest. They had left themselves vulnerable to a fast, aggressive assault. If the human fleet struck hard and fast, they could destroy several Krell ships before the enemy could organize a proper defense. Captain Cole nodded and gave orders to his other ships. They would wait for the Krell to make the first move. Once the Krell began their attack, the humans would strike. Down on Valara Prime, Commander Lenara sat with her government and prepared. Their response to War Master Krex. The message was short and probably written by Captain Cole. It said that Valara Prime was under the protection of the human defense fleet. The Krell should withdraw immediately or face the consequences. When War Master Krex received this message, he actually laughed. His sensors had detected the small human fleet earlier, but he had dismissed them as unimportant. 6 tiny ships against 15 Krell warships? It was not even a fair fight. These humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Either way, they would die. Krex gave the order to begin orbital bombardment of Valara Prime's major cities. His weapons officers armed their main guns and prepared to fire. This would be over quickly. That was when Captain Cole gave the order that his crew had been waiting for. Weapons free. Engage at will. The UNS Defiance and her 5 support ships exploded from their hiding position like predators launching an ambush. Their engines burned at maximum power, accelerating at speeds that should have been impossible for ships their size. The G-forces were crushing, enough to kill most galactic species. The human crews, strapped into their acceleration couches and wearing pressure suits, endured the brutal force without complaint. This was what Deathworlders trained for. The first Krell ship never saw them coming. A spread of railgun rounds, each one traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, punched through its shields and hull armor like they were paper. The rounds were simple kinetic weapons. Chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. They tore through the Krell ship from bow to stern, shredding everything inside. The ship's reactor lost containment and exploded in a brilliant flash of light. War Master Krek stared at his displays in shock. One of his heavy cruisers was simply gone, destroyed in seconds. His weapons officers were shouting reports. The human ships were moving at impossible speeds, pulling maneuvers that should tear their vessels apart. They were not behaving like any military fleet Kreks had encountered before. The human ships did not stay at a safe distance and exchange fire like civilized species. They came in close, knife-fighting range, where superior weapons were less important than speed and aggression. They split up and attacked from multiple directions, forcing the Krell fleet to divide their fire. They used the planets and moons for cover, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Captain Cole stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched his tactical display with satisfaction. The Krell were trained to fight slow, methodical battles. They relied on superior firepower and heavy armor. They were not ready for the kind of aggressive, fast-paced combat that humans specialized in. He ordered the Defiance to launch fighters. The hangar bays opened, and 60 small craft poured out into space. Each fighter was piloted by a human who had trained for years to fly in combat. They were young men and women barely in their 20s who thought nothing of flying directly into enemy fire. The fighters swarmed around the Krell ships like angry insects. They were too small and fast for the Krell's main weapons to track. They fired missiles at weak points in the Krell armor, targeting engine ports and weapon clusters. When their missiles ran out, they made strafing runs with their cannons. Lieutenant Danny Price was one of the fighter pilots. He flew his craft between 2 Krell ships so close that he could see the enemy crews through their viewports. His weapons officer sitting behind him was calling out targets. They fired a missile into a weapon battery, then rolled away as return fire lit up the space where they had been a second before. Danny laughed as he flew. This was what he had trained for. This was what humans did better than any other species. They flew into danger with a smile and made it look easy. But the Krell were not helpless. They were warriors too, and they began to adapt. War Master Krex ordered his ships to close formation and support each other. He directed fire at the human support ships, recognizing that the carrier was the main threat. If he could destroy the Defiance, the smaller ships would be easier to handle. 2 Krell heavy cruisers focused their fire on the UNS Guardian, one of the human destroyers. The Guardian's shields flared bright under the assault, then collapsed. Energy beams tore into the hull. Captain Lisa Morgan, commanding the Guardian, ordered her crew to abandon ship. Escape pods launched into space as the destroyer broke apart. On the Defiance, Captain Cole watched the Guardian die and felt anger burn in his chest. 12 crew members had not made it to the escape pods. 12 humans were gone. He would remember every name, but he could not stop to mourn now. There would be time for that later if they survived. He ordered the Defiance to close on the 2 Krell ships that had destroyed the Guardian. Major Kyle Bennett had been waiting for this moment. His Marines were loaded into boarding pods, ready to take the fight directly to the enemy. The boarding pods launched from the Defiance like missiles. They were small armored capsules with shaped charges on their front. 20 pods, each carrying 10 Marines in full combat armor. They crossed the distance between ships in seconds, too fast for point defense weapons to track. The pods slammed into the hull of a Krell cruiser. The shaped charges detonated, blowing holes through the armor. Before the Krell could seal the breaches, human Marines poured into the ship. Major Bennett led the assault personally. He had fought in boarding actions before in training exercises and simulations. This was his first real combat, and it was everything he had expected. Violent, chaotic, and brutal. The interior of the Krell ship was built for creatures larger and stronger than humans. The corridors were tall and wide. The gravity was heavier than Earth standard. The air was hot and smelled wrong. None of that mattered to the Marines. They had trained in worse conditions. The Krell crew fought back hard. They were big, strong, and armed with energy weapons that could cut through armor, but humans had advantages that the Krell did not expect. Human combat armor was powered, giving them enhanced strength and speed. Human weapons were designed for close-quarters combat, reliable and deadly. Most importantly, humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They knew every dirty trick, every tactical advantage, every way to win a fight. Bennett's squad moved through the ship like they had practiced 100 times. They used grenades to clear rooms. They covered each other's advance. When they encountered heavy resistance, they flanked around and attacked from behind. When the Krell tried to set up defensive positions, the humans found another way through. The fighting was intense. Private Chris Murphy took an energy blast to his shoulder and kept fighting. Corporal Nina Santos pulled a wounded Marine to safety while under fire. Sergeant Ray Cooper single-handedly held a corridor against 6 Krell warriors while his squad completed their objective. Bennett led his Marines toward the bridge of the Krell ship. They blew through 2 security doors and fought past the command crew's bodyguards. The Krell captain tried to activate the self-destruct, but Bennett shot him 3 times before he could finish entering the code. The ship was theirs. Major Bennett contacted Captain Cole and reported success. The Marines had captured a Krell cruiser intact. They were securing the vessel and taking prisoners. Back on the bridge of the Defiance, War Master Krex retreated to the edge of the Valara system and tried to understand what had gone wrong. His fleet had lost 5 ships in less than 2 hours. 5 ships destroyed or captured by 6 small human vessels. It was humiliating and impossible to explain. He stood on the bridge of the Bloodfang and watched the recordings of the battle. The humans moved their ships in ways that should have torn them apart. They accelerated at crushing speeds and made turns that would kill most species. Their weapons were primitive kinetic rounds instead of advanced energy beams, but those simple bullets had punched through Krell armor like it was nothing. Worst of all were the boarding actions. Krex watched footage from the captured cruiser's security cameras. He saw human Marines fighting through his ship, overwhelming trained Krell warriors with speed and tactics. These humans were not just good fighters. They were exceptional professional soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. Krex sent a message to Krell High Command, requesting reinforcements and providing all data on human combat capabilities. He expected support and understanding. Instead, the response from High Command made his blood run cold. The message said that Krell intelligence had encountered rumors about Earth before. There were stories passed between species who traveled the far edges of known space. Stories about a world so hostile that survival required constant adaptation. Stories about creatures that refused to die when wounded, that could run for days without rest, that turned anything they touched into a weapon. High Command said that humans came from what galactic databases called a Class 12 death world. Only a few planets in the known galaxy were that dangerous. Species that evolved on death worlds were rare, because most never survived long enough to develop space travel. But when they did survive, they became something special. They became apex predators with technology. The message ended with new orders. Krex was to be cautious and gather more intelligence. Reinforcements were being sent, but it would take time. In the meantime, he should avoid direct confrontation with the human fleet. Krex felt something he had not experienced in years. Fear, not of death, which was always a possibility in battle, but fear of the unknown. What else could these humans do? What other tricks did they have? How could he fight an enemy that seemed to break all the rules? Aboard the UNS Defiance, Captain Brandon Cole stood in front of a wall that held the names of his dead. 22 names had been added today. He read each one slowly, making himself remember. Lieutenant Helen Cross, who had been the Guardian's weapons officer. Ensign Peter Grant, who was only 20 years old. Pilot Danny Price, who had been shot down covering his wingmate's escape. Each name represented a person. Someone's child, someone's friend, someone's loved one. They had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not come home. They had given their lives to protect strangers. Cole would make sure their sacrifice meant something. Lieutenant Commander Amy Fletcher found him standing there. She reported that repairs were underway on the damaged ships. The Ranger would be combat ready in another day. Salvage crews were recovering what they could from the Guardian. The captured Krell cruiser was being studied by their engineers, who were very excited about the alien technology. Cole asked about the Marines who had conducted the boarding action. Fletcher said they were fine. A few injuries, nothing serious. Major Bennett was already training them for the next assault. Marines were like that, always ready for the next fight. Cole decided it was time to make a difficult communication. He contacted Commander Linara and requested permission to visit Velara Prime in person. He wanted to meet with the Velaran leadership and discuss what would happen next, because this battle was not over. The Krell would return with more ships, and next time they would be prepared for human tactics. Commander Linara agreed and arranged for a shuttle to bring Cole down to the surface. She warned him that Velara Prime's gravity was much lower than Earth standard. He might find it uncomfortable. Cole thanked her for the warning but said he would manage. 6 hours later, Cole stood on Velara Prime for the first time. The planet was beautiful in a way Earth was not. The sky was a soft purple color. The air was warm and smelled like flowers. The gravity was so low that Cole felt like he could jump over buildings. Everything was gentle and peaceful and completely alien to someone who grew up on a harsh world. The Velaran Council met him in their great chamber, a circular room with walls made of living coral. The counselors sat in pools of water, which made them more comfortable. Cole stood on a platform designed for visiting species who did not live in water. Elder Seema spoke first. She thanked Captain Cole for saving Velara Prime and expressed deep sorrow for the humans who had died in the battle. She said the Velaran people would remember their sacrifice forever. They were building a memorial to honor the human dead. Cole thanked her but said he came to discuss the future, not the past. The Krell would return, probably with more ships and better tactics. The small human fleet could not hold off a larger assault. Velara Prime needed to make some hard decisions. Elder Seema asked what options they had. Cole laid out 3 possibilities. First, the Velarans could evacuate their planet and relocate somewhere safer. Second, they could accept Krell rule and hope for mercy. Third, they could fight back with human help and turn Velara Prime into a fortress that the Krell could not take. The Velaran counselors looked at each other with distress. They were not warriors. They had no desire to turn their peaceful world into a battlefield. But they also would not abandon their home or submit to slavery. Young scientist Kima spoke up from her seat near the back. She said the Velarans needed to learn from humans. Earth was a death world, one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. But humans had not just survived. They had thrived. They had built a civilization, developed advanced technology, and spread to the stars. They had done this while constantly fighting their own planet's attempts to kill them. Kima said maybe it was time for Velarans to stop being victims. Maybe they needed to learn how to defend themselves. Not to become warriors like the Krell, but to become survivors like the humans. This suggestion shocked many counselors. The idea of Velarans learning combat went against their entire culture. But Elder Seema surprised everyone. She said Kima was right. The galaxy was more dangerous than they had believed. Species like the Krell would always exist. The Velarans could no longer rely on others to protect them. Cole offered to help. Earth could send military advisors to train Velaran defense forces. They could help build defensive stations and weapons platforms. It would take years, but eventually Velara Prime could defend itself. The Velarans would never be warriors like humans, but they could learn to survive. The Council agreed to this plan. They formally requested that Earth establish a permanent military presence in the Velara system. They also asked to join something Earth called the Defensive Alliance, a network of species who agreed to help protect each other. After the Council meeting ended, Commander Linara took Cole on a tour of the planet's capital city. She wanted him to see what he was protecting. They walked through streets filled with Velarans going about their daily lives. Scientists working in laboratories, artists creating beautiful sculptures, families enjoying the warm weather together. Linara explained that Velarans had evolved without natural predators. Their world gave them everything they needed. They had never developed aggression or the need to fight. When they reached the stars and met other species, they assumed everyone was like them. Learning about species like the Krell had been a harsh awakening. She stopped walking and turned to face Cole. She said she had read about human history. She knew about Earth's wars and violence. She had seen footage of the battle, watched human Marines killing Krell warriors with efficient brutality. She understood now why humans were classified as Deathworlders. But she had also watched Cole standing in front of his memorial wall, reading the names of his dead. She had seen the grief in his eyes. She realized that humans were not mindless killers. They understood the cost of violence. They knew what they were doing when they fought, and it hurt them. She asked Cole a question that had been bothering her. How did humans live with it? How did they carry the weight of all that death and violence? How did they stay sane when their world and their history were so filled with danger and pain? Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he said that humans coped by remembering why they fought. They did not fight for fun or profit. They fought to protect what mattered: family, friends, innocent people who could not defend themselves. Every human who died in that battle chose to be there. They volunteered knowing the risks because they believed some things were worth dying for. He also said that humans tried to be better than their worst moments. Yes, Earth had terrible wars. Yes, humans had killed millions of their own kind. But they had also built hospitals, written laws to protect the weak, created art and music, and reached for the stars. Humans contained both darkness and light. The key was choosing which one to feed, Lenara understood. She took Cole to see the memorial the Velerans were building for the human dead. It was a garden filled with earth flowers that they had grown from seeds in their genetic database. Each flower represented one of the fallen humans. In the center was a... Grand Admiral Vex studied the battle reports from Valara Prime with growing interest. He was a veteran of 40 years of military service, someone who had conquered more worlds than he could count. Warmaster Krex's failure was unusual, but not impossible to understand. The humans had surprise on their side. They had used unconventional tactics. They had gotten lucky. Vex did not believe in luck when it came to warfare. He believed in overwhelming force, careful planning, and absolute discipline. He would not make the same mistakes Krex had made. He would crush this human fleet and take Valara Prime as planned. Krell High Command gave him 10 additional warships and full authority over the operation. Combined with Krex's remaining vessels, Vex would command 25 ships. Even if these humans were as dangerous as the report suggested, they could not stand against such numbers. Vex's flagship, the Destroyer of Hope, was the pride of the Krell military. It was twice the size of any human vessel and carried enough firepower to level a city from orbit. When he arrived at the Valara system, Vex intended to make a statement. These humans would see his fleet and know that resistance was futile. 3 days after the first battle, Vex's fleet exited hyperspace at the edge of the Valara system. 25 massive warships arranged in perfect formation. They moved toward Valara Prime with slow, deliberate confidence. On the UNS Defiance, alarms blared across the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Amy Fletcher called out the warning. 25 contacts, all Krell warships. This was more than twice the size of the first attack fleet. Captain Cole stood from his command chair and studied the tactical display. He had been expecting this, but seeing it was different from anticipating it. His fleet now had reinforcements from Earth. The carrier UNS Vengeance had arrived 2 days ago with 12 support vessels. Combined with his original ships, Cole commanded 18 vessels total, 18 against 25. The odds were not good, but they were better than 6 against 15 had been. Admiral Patricia Hayes was commanding the Vengeance. She had insisted on coming herself when Earth Command learned about the situation at Valara Prime. She opened a communication channel to Cole and asked for his assessment. Cole said the Krell were not making the same mistakes as before. Their formation was tight and defensive. They were advancing slowly, taking time to scan for ambushes. Whoever was commanding that fleet had learned from the first battle. Admiral Hayes agreed. She said they needed to change tactics. The Krell were expecting humans to make fast, aggressive attacks. Instead, they should play defensive and force the Krell to come to them. Use Valara Prime's orbital stations and moon bases as defensive strongpoints. Make the Krell fight on human terms. Cole liked this plan. He ordered his fleet to take up defensive positions around Valara Prime. The Valarans had been working around the clock to install weapons platforms and shield generators on their orbital facilities. It was not much, but it would help. Grand Admiral Vex watched the human fleet prepare their defenses and smiled. Let them hide behind their stations. It would not save them. He broadcast a message directly to the human commanders. His voice was cold and filled with authority. He said that resistance was pointless. The Krell fleet would destroy every human ship and then bombard Valara Prime until nothing remained. He offered one chance for surrender. The humans could leave the system with their lives. The Valarans would be taken as planned. This was mercy. This was more than the humans deserved. Captain Cole responded with a message that Admiral Hayes approved before sending. He said the Krell had one chance to leave peacefully. Turn around and go home. This system was under human protection. Any attack would be met with deadly force. Vex actually laughed when he heard this message. These humans were either very brave or very stupid. Either way, they would die. He gave the order to attack. The Krell fleet split into 3 groups, each one approaching Valara Prime from a different angle. This was a textbook maneuver designed to divide enemy forces. Vex expected the humans to scatter and try to defend multiple positions. Instead, the human fleet stayed together in one tight formation. This confused Vex for a moment. Why would they not spread out to cover more territory? Then he understood. The humans were going to focus all their firepower on one Krell group at a time. It was tactically sound, but would leave other areas undefended. The first Krell group, 8 warships strong, approached Valara Prime's largest orbital station. This station was home to 50,000 Valarans and now housed defensive weapons installed by human engineers. As the Krell ships came into range, the station opened fire. Energy beams and missile batteries lit up space. The Krell ships raised their shields and returned fire. The station's shields held for several minutes, then began to fail under sustained bombardment. It looked like the station would be destroyed within the hour. That was when the human fleet struck. All 18 ships had been hiding on the far side of Valara Prime, using the planet itself as cover. They came around the curve of the planet at maximum acceleration, weapons already firing. The first Krell ship in formation took a full spread of railgun fire from 3 human vessels. Its shields collapsed instantly and the kinetic rounds tore through armor and hull. The ship broke apart in a massive explosion. Commander Lisa Morgan had survived the destruction of the Guardian during the first battle. She had been promoted and given command of the new destroyer UNS Victory. She led her ship directly into the Krell formation, her weapons firing continuously. Her crew fought like demons, pushing their ship to its limits. Major Kyle Bennett and his Marines were aboard the assault ship UNS Thunder. Their mission was simple: board and capture as many Krell vessels as possible. Bennett had studied the recordings from the first boarding action and developed new tactics. This time they were ready. The Thunder launched 40 boarding pods at once, targeting 2 Krell cruisers. The pods spread out as they crossed the distance, making it harder for point defense to track them all. Most made it through and slammed into enemy hulls. Bennett's squad hit their target and cut through into the ship. The Krell were ready this time. They had set up defensive positions near all the likely breach points. Heavy weapons and armored troops waited for the humans. But humans adapted faster than Krell expected. Instead of pushing through the obvious routes, the Marines used cutting torches to make new paths through the ship's internal structure. They came at the Krell defenses from unexpected angles. Corporal Nina Santos led her fire team through a ventilation shaft that was barely large enough for humans in armor. They emerged behind a Krell defensive position and opened fire, catching the enemy completely by surprise. The Krell position collapsed in minutes. All across the ship, similar battles played out. Human Marines using speed, flexibility, and improvisation to overcome Krell strength and numbers. It was messy and brutal, and exactly the kind of fighting humans were good at. On the bridge of the Destroyer of Hope, Grand Admiral Vex watched his carefully planned attack fall apart. The humans had not behaved as predicted. They concentrated their forces instead of spreading out. They ignored the other 2 Krell groups and focused everything on destroying one group completely. 5 of the 8 ships in that group were now destroyed or captured. The remaining 3 were damaged and retreating. Vex's first attack wave had been shattered. He ordered his other 2 groups to converge on the human fleet's position. He would use his numerical advantage to surround and destroy them. But the humans were already moving, pulling back toward Valara Prime's defensive stations. Admiral Hayes knew they could not win a straight fight against 20 remaining Krell ships. But they did not need to win. They just needed to hold out long enough. She had sent a message to Earth Defense Command 3 days ago, requesting additional support. That support was due to arrive any time now. The battle raged for 3 more hours. Human ships darted in and out of the Krell formation, taking shots when they could and retreating before they could be surrounded. The Valarans' orbital stations provided covering fire, forcing the Krell to split their attention. Captain Cole pushed the Defiance hard. His ship took hit after hit, shields flaring bright under sustained weapons fire. His crew worked with desperate efficiency, keeping shields up and weapons firing even as damage reports poured in from all sections. Lieutenant Commander Fletcher called out new contacts on her sensors. More ships were arriving. For a moment, Cole feared it was more Krell reinforcements. Then Fletcher confirmed the identification. 20 human vessels led by the battleship UNS Constitution. Earth had sent the big guns. The new arrivals did not wait to coordinate. They jumped straight into the battle, their weapons firing before they had even fully exited hyperspace. The Krell fleet suddenly found itself caught between two human forces. Grand Admiral Vex recognized defeat when he saw it. His fleet was being torn apart. He had lost 9 ships already, with 4 more heavily damaged. The humans just kept coming, kept fighting, refused to quit no matter how badly damaged their ships were. He gave the order to retreat. The remaining Krell vessels broke formation and scattered, each one jumping to hyperspace as quickly as they could power up their drives. Vex's flagship was one of the last to leave. As it jumped away, Vex took one last look at the human fleet and understood. 3 weeks after the battle, Valara Prime had transformed. The peaceful world that had never known war now bristled with defensive stations. Human engineers worked alongside Valaran scientists to build shields, weapons platforms, and early warning systems. Everywhere you looked, there were signs that things had changed forever. Captain Brandon Cole stood in the newly completed memorial garden and looked at the names carved into white stone. 73 humans had died defending Valara Prime across both battles. Each name had a small crystal placed beneath it. The Velaran said the crystals would catch the light and shine forever, so the dead would always be remembered. Commander Linara approached quietly. She had learned that humans sometimes needed silence when visiting their dead. She waited until Cole turned to face her before speaking. She told him that the Valaran Council had made their decision. They wanted to formally join Earth's defensive alliance. They also wanted to establish a permanent human military base in their system. They understood now that peace had to be defended. It could not be taken for granted. Cole said Earth would be honored to accept. The alliance was growing. 3 other species had already signed treaties after hearing about the Battle of Valara Prime. More were sending diplomatic requests. Humanity was becoming known as a species that kept its word and protected its allies. But Cole also warned Linara that this would change Valaran society. Having a military presence meant some Velarans would need to serve in defense forces. They would need to learn about weapons and tactics. Some would die in future conflicts. Was Valara Prime ready for that? Linara was quiet for a moment. Then she said that young Valarans like Kima were already volunteering for the new defense force. They had seen what humans were willing to do for strangers. They wanted to learn how to protect their own world. They wanted to be brave like the humans who saved them. She also said something else. She said humans had taught Velarans an important lesson. There was a difference between being peaceful and being helpless. The Valarans would always prefer peace. They would always try to solve problems without violence, but they would no longer be defenseless. They would learn to survive. Cole smiled and said that was all anyone could ask. Being strong did not mean you had to be aggressive. It just meant you had choices when trouble came. They walked through the garden together, past flowers from Earth and plants from Valara Prime growing side by side. Human and Velaran children played nearby, the young of both species learning about each other. It was a glimpse of what the future could be. Back on Earth, news of the battles spread quickly. The recording showed human ships fighting against superior numbers. They showed Marines boarding enemy vessels. They showed Captain Cole and his crew risking everything to protect aliens they had never met. The reactions were mixed. Some people were proud. They saw humanity becoming heroes, standing up for what was right. Others were worried. They feared that humanity was getting involved in conflicts that were not their concern. They argued that human lives were being spent to save aliens who offered nothing in return. Admiral Patricia Hayes addressed these concerns in a speech that was broadcast across Earth and to all human colonies. She stood at a podium and spoke with the authority of someone who had commanded ships in battle. She said that Earth had learned hard lessons throughout its history. They had learned what happened when good people did nothing while others suffered. They had learned that turning away from evil did not make you safe. It just made you complicit. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself in wars, but those wars had also taught them the value of standing together. The value of protecting those who could not protect themselves. The value of sacrifice for a greater cause. She said that yes, humans had died at Valara Prime, but those deaths had meaning. They had saved millions of innocent lives. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was more than just another aggressive species. They were people who believed in something bigger than themselves. The speech was powerful and effective. Support for the defensive alliance grew. More young humans volunteered for military service. Earth began building new ships and training new crews. Humanity was preparing for its new role as protectors. Meanwhile, in Krell space, Grand Admiral Vex faced consequences for his failure. He had lost 14 ships at Valara Prime and failed to complete his mission. The Krell High Command was not pleased. They stripped him of his rank and sent him to command a remote outpost far from the heart of Krell territory. But the Krell military learned from the defeat. They studied human tactics carefully. They realized that humans fought differently than any species they had encountered before. Humans were willing to take risks that seemed insane. They improvised constantly. They never gave up, even when defeat seemed certain. The Krell began developing new strategies specifically designed to counter human tactics. They trained their forces to expect the unexpected. They built ships with better point defense to stop boarding actions. They prepared for the next encounter with these Deathworlders, because there would be a next encounter. The Krell had claimed dozens of systems. They would not abandon their expansion just because one attack had failed. The conflict between the Krell Dominion and humanity's alliance was just beginning. On Valara Prime, Major Kyle Bennett worked with the first group of Valaran volunteers for the Defense Force. Teaching them was challenging. Valarans were not built for combat. They were smaller and weaker than humans. They had evolved without aggression or fighting instincts. But Bennett found ways to work with what they had. Valarans were smart and learned quickly. They had excellent coordination and could work together naturally. They were patient and precise, good qualities for technical roles like weapons operations and sensor monitoring. He trained them not to be human warriors, but to be Valaran defenders. They would never match human marines in close combat, but they could operate defensive systems, coordinate fleet movements, and provide support roles that freed up humans for frontline combat. Young Kima was his best student. She had volunteered immediately after the battle and showed natural talent for tactical thinking. She asked endless questions about human military history and strategy. She wanted to understand how humans had survived their harsh world and turned that survival into strength. Bennett told her that humans succeeded because they never fought alone. On Earth, humans formed tribes, communities, and nations. They protected each other. The strong helped the weak. They shared knowledge and resources. That cooperation was what allowed humans to survive and eventually thrive. Kima said that Valarans understood cooperation. They had always worked together, but they had never needed to cooperate for defense before. Learning this new way of thinking was hard but necessary. Bennett agreed. He said that change was always hard. But the galaxy was dangerous, and species that could not adapt did not survive. Valarans were learning to adapt while keeping their core values of peace and cooperation. That was something to be proud of. Weeks turned into months. The human presence at Valara Prime became normal. Human ships patrolled the system. Human advisors worked with Valaran defense forces. Human families started arriving. Military dependents who came to support their loved ones stationed at the new base. A small Earth town grew on Valara Prime's largest moon. It had homes, schools, shops, and recreational facilities. Human children played with Valaran children. Cultural exchange programs taught both species about each other. Slowly, the two civilizations were learning to live together. Captain Cole remained at Valara Prime as the commander of the defense station. The Defiance had been repaired and upgraded with some technology learned from captured Krell ships. His crew had received medals and recognition from both Earth and the Valaran Council. But Cole knew this peaceful time would not last forever. The Krell were still out there. Other aggressive species existed in the galaxy. Humanity had made itself a target by standing up and saying that innocent species deserved protection. One evening, Cole stood on an observation deck looking out at Valara Prime. The planet was beautiful, with its purple sky and warm oceans. It was worth protecting. All the pain and sacrifice had been worth it. Lieutenant Commander Amy Fletcher joined him. She had been offered a promotion in command of her own ship, but she turned it down. She said she wanted to stay with the Defiance and Captain Cole. They had been through too much together. She asked Cole if he thought they had made the right choice. Coming to Valara Prime, fighting the Krell, committing Earth to this role as galactic protectors. Was it worth the cost? Cole thought about the question carefully. He thought about the 73 names in the memorial garden. He thought about the millions of Valarans who were alive because humans had answered their call. He thought about the alliance growing between species who wanted to build something better than the violent chaos that dominated too much of the galaxy. He said yes. It was worth it, because someone had to stand up. Someone had to draw a line and say that preying on the weak was not acceptable. Humans had the strength to make that stand. That meant they had a responsibility to do it. Fletcher smiled and said she agreed. She was proud to be human, proud to serve with people who believed in something bigger than themselves. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars.